Welcome to Restoration Beyond the Couch. I'm Dr. Lee Long, and in this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Don Hebbard, one of our counselors here at Restoration. Together, we're talking about something many people face, but few talk about honestly, and that's dating again. In this conversation, we go beyond the surface and explore the unexpected emotional layers, challenges, and opportunities that come with re-entering the dating world later in life or after loss. Whether you're navigating this season yourself or supporting someone who is, this episode offers wisdom, encouragement, and real insight. Your path to mental wellness starts here. Welcome, Don, Dr. Don Hebbard, to Restoration Beyond the Couch. I am so excited you're with us today. You are a man of so many talents, and the reason why we're here today is to talk about your latest book called Rematch. You can see here, Love in Extended Adulthood, and what a treasure of a book. So I won't go into that yet, but I just want to say welcome and thank you for being here.
Well, thanks, Lee. It's good to be with you. I miss being with you every week. And now that I'm in Houston, I have to do this long distance every once in a while. We have to get our fix long distance sometimes.
That's right. I know.
Yeah.
We had I had the great pleasure and joy of getting to be with you every week. And now it's catch as catch can.
Yeah. I went off and ran away from Fort Worth and ran to the other side of the state. But there you go.
But for a good reason, right?
Yeah. She's a very good reason. So that's okay. Yeah.
So would you catch our listeners up on why you ran away to Houston?
Yeah, sure. Because it's ties into the book so well. After being single again for 20 years, I guess. Lisa and I met on Match. She's here in Houston. I was up in Dallas, and we commuted, dated. We long distance dated for about 3 years, and then we got married last October. And because I teach and a lot of my work's online, it made more sense for me to come to Houston, and I'm selling my place up in Dallas right now. And so I'm in a whole new restructuring of a whole new life, which is kind of interesting to be doing.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, is she a lot of the inspiration behind this book?
Yeah, the book has been a project for a number of years. When I was going through this pretty early on, one of my mentors, who you'd heard me talk a lot about, James Cale, Cale told me, he said, you need to keep notes on this, because he said at some point in time, as a marriage and family person going through all this, you may have some things you want to write about. And I thought, I don't know about that. But anyway, so I started taking notes and journals and stuff, the first year into this thing. And it just shoved them aside and just started collecting that stuff. And then probably about a year into dating Lisa, and our thing was really coming together nicely, Cale came back to me and he said, okay, you need to get your typewriter out. It's time to get after that thing. So
I love it. I love that. So when you found yourself newly single again, 20 something years ago, he prompted you to keep notes of what it was like to date as a therapist.
Yep.
What was that experience like? I mean, just thinking it all back through.
Yeah, it was such a discovery for me, because as you know, being a therapist, we study this stuff, we read about it, we go to the seminars. This is our world, and I thought I knew what I was walking into. And I say in the first chapter, I thought, well, I'll go out, I'll date a little bit, I'll meet a nice lady and, start life over again. And that was the most ridiculous thought that ever went through my brain, because there we're living through such a shift in the way in which people meet and fall in love and do that whole thing, that for me, it was such a discovery that what I had learned in practice was not, some of it was going to work, and then some of it I was going to have to throw out because it's all so new.
What were some of those tensions that you saw? Because you're right, we are in a really big shift in how we meet people, like the culture shift, like we that is upon us, like it or not.
Right. Yeah. Well, it one of the big shifts, of course, it's the reason I call it, finding love in extended adulthood, is that when you're like, I was 47 when I started this, and the the template and the model that I used back in college in my 20s to meet and date, back then I was an old guy. You called up the dorm, there was one phone on the dorm hall. You called in for, you know, Mary in room 232, they'd scream her name out, and then you'd hope you didn't hear a cackle of laughing from other girls in their rooms, and they'd come down to the phone. I had 20 girls sharing one phone, and it was all about propinquity. You dated and you mated people that you were around, and you did that within that mid 20s, late 20s period of time, and you really locked in to all those major commitments: who you're going to be married to, where you're going to live, what your occupation was. All that stuff got started early on. Well, nowadays, all that stuff's getting shoved back a decade. People are doing that in their 30s. And now people in their 50s and 60s and 70s are dating, and they have these old templates of how they used to date back in their 20s. And those don't work when you're 50 or 60 or 70 years old. You're going to do it, but it's going to be done in a whole different way. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Makes perfect sense, because the interesting thing there is, like, when you're talking about, you call up to the dorm and you ask for Mary in room 20 whatever, you have all these, you're dating in front of a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
And now, with everything, well, not everything, but most things being online and very siloed, it's
Yeah.
you don't date out in front of a big community.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's a great observation. You're very siloed. It's a very honestly, it's a very lonely kind of endeavor, which is why I went and got some, I called them wingmen and wingwomen to make sure I wasn't crazy sometimes. But yeah, it's a very lonely, and that's why a lot of people get real discouraged with it, is because you get ghosted, you get lied to, you get betrayed, all that other stuff goes on, or there's fake, profiles and whatever. And you're kind of doing it alone, and you go, this is too crazy. I can't do this. And so people have to kind of develop that alligator hide and kind of, toughen up a little bit and be able to pull it off.
That does seem like it is a theme of date. I think it's a theme of dating in general now, because I
Yeah.
hear this from the folks I work with in their, teens, 20s, 30s and up. It's that it does seem like it's a big cultural shift. I don't know that I've thought about the fact that it's a big cultural shift for people 40s and up, or if it's just across the board, but it's impacting 40s and up. Maybe I should say late 40s and up, because we didn't grow up with, I mean, I remember when, the first cell phone, I didn't have a real cell phone until I was, married.
Yeah.
And you got dial-up internet in college. I mean, where you dial on and it makes this horrible noise and then squeaks and squawks, and then finally it connects, and you might be able to hack out an email, and then it might take a minute if you had a photo to attach to it. And now it's like, I mean, kids are in restaurants dialing up, all types of things, sending all types of files, and it just goes like that. You know,
Yeah.
I'm wondering, do you think that there's, like, Do you think that it's a technology thing? Do you think it's a cultural thing? Do you think it's all of the above?
Yeah, it's a great observation. It's a great question. And yeah, I think it's all of the above. And I think for you know, just pick a number, the 50s and up that did not grow up maybe as technology driven and comfortable with that, there's the whole um, you know, I'm a new single person, either widowed or divorced or whatever, and I'm trying to figure out how to date at this point in time. You know, what do I do? What do I say? How do I present myself? What am I looking for? All of those questions. What are those essentials? And then there's navigating the technology part of it, which is like, okay, what pictures do I put up? How do I describe myself? I probably wrote 50, 75 different versions of profiles through the years. Short, long, cute, funny, serious, you name it kind of thing. And you're trying to navigate. And then the different platforms are going to have different procedures that you have to follow, to match up with some people. Early on, eHarmony, they had these crazy 8 stages of questions you went through that were just brutal because they were so self-revealing early on. And thankfully they got rid of that stuff. And then you got other platforms like Match where you're basically, out there doing all your picking and sorting and profiling yourself. And so for those older folks, it's the how do I date at this point in time? And then how do I not look like I'm stupid online trying to do this at the same time? And then not get, paired up with somebody that's, you know, not somebody of character that I would want to go out with because everybody's heard the horror stories.
Ooh, have we heard the horror stories?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because yeah, you're so spot on. I was listening to a body language expert who was talking about, how to pick the best online profile picture. And I just,
Oh, interesting.
oh my gosh, like the granular nature of what we can get into. Now, she was doing a phenomenal job. She had such great ideas and feedbacks and thoughts, but wow, it seemed overwhelming.
Yeah.
To think, oh, you need a picture with a half tilt and a smile and a don't smile with your teeth, or if you're wanting to convey this, convey. And it's like, oh my gosh, how would you know what to convey?
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah. It can be absolutely overwhelming. And what I ended up looking for after, a long time of being online dating and whatever, and I actually liked it. I mean, I'm a proponent of it. I'm in favor of it for a number of reasons. But I would look for um, a sense of authenticity coming through in the way the person wrote, in the way they would text, in the way they would present themselves. If they just seemed basically honest, if there was a sense of humor in there and real authenticity, if there's a real person, they seem to be trying honestly to meet somebody and go out, then that would be what I would look for more than that, real getting into the details of things.
yeah, that makes sense. And I would imagine it's difficult to know if there's authenticity without giving it some space and time, which is
Yeah.
paired out authenticity.
Yeah, and you were talking about surprises. One of the things I learned through the years was that the quick startups, there were people out there they were just in a hurry. And, you'd hear from them, you'd get 5 messages in one day. They want to be meeting, in 2 days or 3 days and then meet again. It was just boom, 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 boom.
It's
And
like,
invariably, those were the ones that would drop off the end of the earth, and you never hear anything from them because they're on to the next match, and they'd wear you out too. So to your point, when you'd get somebody who had a sense of timing, and they seemed to be within themselves, they weren't rushing as much. That was usually a pretty good sign.
that makes good sense. Yeah. It makes me think about too, like when you find somebody who's sounds like to me you're talking about speed dating, like they're trying to speed through the process.
Yeah.
There's so many there's the potential of so many complexities of a kids, career, extended family that all still want and need your attention and aren't willing to give that up and shouldn't be willing to give that up, maybe to you going out and finding a new mate. What advice do you have, and how do you address that?
Yeah. And that's a great observation. And one of the things I do, you were mentioning that there's steps in the book, kind of toward the end of that process. I ask, how is this affecting your decision making? How is this affecting your extended family? What's the overall impact of this relationship on your entire life? And you know as well as I do, you've done enough therapy to know that when you're matched up with somebody who's got some pretty serious problems, they're going to want to constrict and control your life and your relationships and the people you're around. And they're going to want to be more controlling and have your attention. And if you're dealing with someone who's healthier, they're going to be a better partner. They're going to incorporate your life into their life, and of course, when you're 50 or 60, those are bigger lives to put together than what it is when you're 20 years old, because you've got kids, grandkids, or, like we had separate towns and big lives both places. And so, yeah, to your point, when you've got somebody and it happens real subtly. You get certain personalities that will very subtly cut off their partner's relationships with their kids and with family members and with people they played racquetball with. And suddenly it's just down to those two people. Well, that's usually a pretty bad sign.
Yeah, because it's like you said, there's a further siloing that
Yep.
takes you away from this. Because the thing that I think is really beautiful about yours and Lisa's relationship is that I know she has been woven into your circle, and I know you've been woven into hers. And so rather than pairing out what you previously had, it's like you guys have joined a way bigger support network. It's like
Yeah.
it's like you guys have had like this wonderful multiplication here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Um, uh, Kale made the comment early on. He said, talking about me, because you know me, my life. He said, you do work really well, but you need to marry some fun. And I did. Lisa's just a lot of fun, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to come to Houston. I lived in Dallas since '68. I lived other places, but Dallas was home since '68. But her whole social network down here is so rich and interesting and um, varied. And I've picked up a whole new aspect to my life that's way beyond drumming and working all the time, which is, all I did. And so, yeah. And then her family's all gone. They've all passed. And so, you know, coming in and she just picked up with my kids right away, and she texts them and talks to them as much as I do. And so it was a nice blending of those things, and we both have benefited from that.
Which is such an immense blessing, not just to you, but to your extended crew and to hers, because
Yeah,
it's a dovetailing in of both of you, and you guys both get to be blessings to all of that, which is a really sweet place to be.
yeah, and it's interesting because um, I was talking with Dr. Margaret Pender, and Margaret from Amberton days, and we both love her dearly, LMFT. And she made the comment a number of years ago to me about this dating thing. She said, Don, she said, when it works and when it's right, you just don't have to work at it that hard. It just comes together and it fits in a nice way. You have to obviously relationships all work, but you said there's a coming together and a blending there that you're not having to just force.
Yeah.
And I think she was exactly right.
I think she is too. And it's funny because people say to me, I've been with my wife for 28 or 29 years. But
Yeah,
when people say, oh, marriage is hard work. I'm like, yeah, oh, is it? Because it's like you're saying, it's like when you find the person that you're compatible with,
yeah,
there's so much synergy there that you
yeah,
don't, it is work. We do work at our marriage, but when work is fun, it feels less like work and more enjoyable. And I
yeah,
think that's what you get at.
yeah. And I think one of the, not to be negative at all, but I think one of the discouraging things about dating in this second half of life is you do have to go through usually a number of people to date to finally find that one where it does work. And I would talk to a lot of people who dated that were my age, and they would say repeatedly, I'm going to keep at it because I'm not going to settle. And that was kind of the phrase they would use. I don't want to settle. I want to find that person that there's that nice complementary relationship too. And I always respected those people tremendously because it's just a lot of work.
Well, because like you're talking about, you're going through. I mean, I'd be curious if there's, I don't know if you have this number, but I'd be curious to know how many people you've been through or one would go through to find that one person. And I'm not saying that there's only one person out there for you. I don't believe that. But
Right. No.
go through how many people a person would go through to find somebody that is compatible.
Yeah.
Because just the sheer volume
Yeah.
of people would seem to me overwhelming. And I know that when I talk to folks who are post divorce, they're walking back through the whole idea of dating, or they're post widow or widower, and they're talking about this whole idea of dating again. It does seem so overwhelming, and they're like, I know it's a numbers game. How many people am I going to have to go out with to find somebody that is compatible?
Yeah, yeah. And that's where my dating coaches kept telling me is you got to keep fishing and don't get locked in too quickly. A first date and then you shut down all the other people you're communicating with. And that's real hard to do, especially if you both kind of think, oh, wow, this is pretty exciting. But it is. It's what Kale called it's a numbers game. You just got to go out on enough dates and meet enough people. But the thing that's interesting about it, and if you can look at it, keep a sense of humor, and I try to envision it as a learning experience and an adventure and me trying to learn more about myself. But it was always real interesting. It was fascinating to me, one, um, the people I would be attracted to, because I started thinking, okay, I kind of know what I'm attracted to. And the longer I dated, the broader and the more intricate that became. You go out on a date and you'd find yourself going, wow, they're really interesting. That would be a fun person to date that you might never look at the profile and think, oh, that's going to be, way up there. The other one's real interesting is the reverse of that. When you're out there online, women can contact you as well, which, I was always real amazed at the women who would initiate contact with me because I would, I might go, well, I might pass you on the street and I would never dream you'd be interested in going out with me. And so it really broadens your view of attraction and how complicated that thing is.
Well, that's very well said because I think about the people that, like we tend to have a type or we think we do.
Yeah, we think we do.
Right. And I think that at times people get super locked in on, well, they don't meet my 5 criteria.
Yeah,
You go out on a date and you're like, so, do you attend church? Yes, I do. Okay, check. Do you still speak with your family? Yes, I do. And okay, check. And it's like we can get so locked in, we miss we miss a breadth, a depth and a breadth of the things that we could potentially see in somebody else that might blow the doors off of our list of 5 or 10 things that we want. Thoughts on that?
Oh, oh, yeah, you're hitting on one of the big core issues there. I couldn't agree with you more because I'd go out on these first dates and it was almost like a car salesman coming in and going through the checkoff of all the features on this model. Do you have four-wheel drive? How many miles do you have on you? Has your transmission been changed recently? I mean, it was like, but they're going through you're exactly right, going through, and you contrast that with dates. You go out with people and they would just show up. It would be like, let's talk and let me get to know you a little bit and you get to know me a little bit. And even if there wasn't any chemistry, even if, well, we're not going to go out again, but you'd have this lovely conversation with somebody and you'd make a friend and, you'd learn something about somebody that you didn't know. That was a lot more fun to do than the checklist thing.
Oh, no kidding. Because on one level, not to be crass, but I would imagine that checklist feels a little bit like a medical exam, like
Oh, yeah.
you for a colonoscopy. Sorry to be crass.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's like there's no chemistry here, but that doesn't matter. We can still get to know one another and not to make it sound perfunctory, but what a great opportunity to practice getting to know somebody. And
Yeah.
like I said, you never know who you would be attracted to and what things you learn about people that pique your interest and help you grow.
Yeah, and that's where so much of the material from the book came from. I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dates I went on. I have no idea, but a lot. And so many of them, you'd know midway into it, you'd both kind of have a feeling, it's not going to go on. And it would switch gears and you'd start talking about that person would want to say, well, what's it been like for you dating online? Well, what's it been like for you? And you start sharing war stories and things with one another. And it's like you're both in the same boat together. And that's where I learned so much from people was you'd be on those dates where you'd know we're not going to date, but we're both dating. And what's it been like? And you talk for an hour about that stuff. And I learned so much from people that way.
That's a really that makes a lot of good sense. I mean, it's not only grabbing your experiences, but it's like you're grabbing their experiences. And I would imagine knowing you that you collating all that and looking for themes and what's common and what happens. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. I
Yeah.
have a question for you about that. How would you coach somebody who because thinking about all of that, I mean, you when you know it's not going to, or I guess early on, you're thinking, I'm wondering if one's thinking, hey, I'm not going to just get out there and be vulnerable with everybody because I'll have, as Brene Brown calls it, I'll have a vulnerability hangover every morning, and
Yeah.
because I'm doing it so often, won't be as vulnerable anymore.
Yeah. Right.
Self-protection, where somebody comes in and they're sitting like this, and like closing their body language and not hardly talking, and how many kids do you have? Enough, or that kind
Yeah.
of, you're not being, how would you coach somebody to find that balance?
Mm. Uh, to where they be a little bit more comfortable opening up
Yeah,
on
like
those dates.
vulnerability versus self-protection. I mean, would you suggest to people to be protective in the beginning? Would you, I don't know, what would your sage wisdom on that be?
Well, that's a great question. Um, I probably, I probably erred on the being a little more open and being a little more out there because that's just kind of my personality. I can pull that off, and it does get tiring over time because you feel like you're having the same conversations over and over and over again. Um, one of the and one of the things we run into, at least I ran into an awful lot, was people who were coached to get out there dating by a friend, one of their kids, wrote their profile, got them, and you'd get on a date with them, and they'd own up to it. They'd say, this is the first time I've been out and I've tried this and I'm just not ready. And I can't tell you the dozens and dozens and dozens of times that happened. And so there are a lot of people that because they've been hurt, probably in the past in a relationship, they're still carrying some woundedness around.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, and I talk about it in the book, those first two phases, before you get started dating, you got to work on yourself and do some internal healing, some core work. But a lot of people, they skip that. They're going to think dating's going to solve my woundedness. And it's just going to frustrate it more and more.
That makes so much sense because you're right. Regardless of why you find yourself in this place at this time of life where you're out dating, whether it's through going through a divorce, whether it's being a widow or a widower, there's something there that you went through that you've got to you're suggesting, and I'm agreeing that you got to sort out. You have to. I always say you have to find me before I can bring me to we.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And for obviously, if a marriage ends in death, that's one set of circumstances, and there'll be grief and there'll be loss, and there's that dynamic. If a marriage is going to end through a divorce, then there's some fracturing there. There's some woundedness there. Well, early on in my divorce adjustment, I'm an expert at talking about what my spouse did that ruined the marriage. And I've got that narrative down pat. Well, if you do your work, the narrative you really get is your own narrative. This is what I did that led to this is what I contributed to the failure of that thing. And if I don't have that narrative, if I haven't owned my own story of what my woundedness is, there's a real strong likelihood I'm going to go out, get on Match, and repeat it all over again. And I'm going to find myself, back as one woman said, she said, I've been married 3 times, but it's the same man, just in a different body. He said, my man picker is broken. Yeah, well, she finally decided she was going to do her work. So, yeah, I agree with you 100% on that.
Yeah, because what is it? The divorce rate now for first marriages is about roughly 50%. For second marriages, it's roughly 60%. And for third marriages, it's roughly 75%, correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just
Do your
going on that thing.
right.
Yeah, going on that thing.
It's
Yeah,
do your work.
do
And
your work. Yeah,
I love what you're saying about one of the ways that we can understand as a person's out there in enjoying that dating process, and hopefully they are enjoying that dating process. But
yeah,
if they're enjoying that dating process, one of those cues to look for is if everything's externalized, that hey, my husband or my ex-husband or my ex-wife or anything that's externalizing it out to them, and you don't hear it coming back to what was my contribution, even if your contribution was 5%, still
yeah,
still the thing that I can own.
yeah, yeah. My contribution may have been I just didn't see it. I it was there in black and white. I just didn't recognize it or didn't want to look at it. Okay, well, that says something about me.
I know. Yeah.
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 Um, uh,
That's do you think that speaking of divorce and widowing, do you think that did you I don't know if you dated widows, but I'm curious if you found in your experience and research that dating someone who had been through a divorce was different than dating somebody who had been widowed or widowed.
yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, sometimes it was. With two things on the widows that were real interesting. One was you'd encounter them that I remember having a date with a woman. We were matched on one of the platforms. She was up in Lubbock, and she weightlifter and nurse and just a lot of things we had in common. And I drove up there, and her ex had been a college administrator, and I was a college administrator at that time. So we had a lot of things in common, this and the other. And I drove up and we were at a Mexican restaurant, just met her and we had been talking for a few hours and whatever. And she looked at me and she said, I can't do this. Uh, and, we talked later and she just said, getting out there and dating has helped me understand I'm not over him. So the grief hadn't worked through. And so, yeah, I ran into women who they'd had the love of what I call is they had their love of their love of their life.
Yeah.
And that was it. Then the other one, though, that was real interesting was you'd run into women who had been married to one kind of guy. I talk about it in the book. There was a lady I knew years ago, and she was married to an engineer, and he was, buttoned down in Allen Edmonds shoes and real conservative. And she was too, to match that. And then he passed away real suddenly, and she shows up with this guy from South America who's just flamboyant and hairy and just out there. And all of her friends were going, she's lost her mind. Well, no, she just shifted that template of attraction. She was very broad for her. And being a widow let some new parts of her personality come out and be reinforced.
That's so interesting because we see that in our offices, right? And
Right.
people do, especially the family members, are thinking, "Oh my gosh," like you said, they have lost their ever loving mind, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, I do think that there's a certain point of being a widow or a widower if you were married to, like you said, the love of your life. There is a certain
Yeah.
part that chapter that closes off and says, okay, I don't want to find somebody that's the same. Like you were saying about this woman that you were dating that was a nurse and that, all these things that you all enjoyed together, but you were way too similar to
Too
this
similar.
that she lost. And so there
Yeah.
can be this whole idea of looking for where am I on the spectrum of life and what do I enjoy? And it's like, had that, loved it, it was amazing, and I don't want to have it again. It's almost like I hope this isn't irreverent, but it's like it's a terrible analogy, and my apologies, but it's like having this amazing meal and experience, and then it's
Yes.
recreated. It's like, no, 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 no. I don't want to recreate that. That was too amazing, too perfect. Don't try it. So while that was in a French restaurant, let's go to a Brazilian steakhouse and let's try it that way. So I get what you
Right.
interesting. But what do you
Yeah.
see, do you see that similarly with women who have gone through a divorce, or would you say there's really no pattern there?
Wow. Yeah. With the divorce, there, of course, if so many of the divorced people, men and women, they, well, this from transition work, they want to run through the ending, get through, get through the divorce as quick as they can, put a profile out there, get back out dating because their friends are saying, as soon as you can get dating, you'll get to feeling better. And they skip over looking at what happened in the marriage, what happened to them, going through that ending, being alone. Learning to be alone is a really good thing. And it's like Murray Bowen said, a real balanced person can be separate and together and be whole in that. Well, he was exactly right. And so the divorced people, a lot of times they'll run out, they'll date real quick, and then they'll get paired up with someone who's not good for them, have a bad experience, and then now you've got the divorce and you've got this bad dating history lopped on top of each other. And so what I try and get people to do is slow this thing down a little bit, give yourself some time, and give yourself some room to breathe a little bit and figure out who you are and then what you're looking for. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that may ebb and flow, that may change, that may as you walk through the whole idea of self-discovery.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, it's it's what I call that pocket list of non-negotiables. What can you put on a 3x5 card that you have to have in a relationship. Well, chances are what that looks like when you're 25 is very different from what it looks like when you're 55. Or it can look different from the divorce to the time that you're starting to date again. Well, that's a really good thing. It means I know myself better.
How would you capture for someone the idea of healthy expectations? Because you're right, expectations change in in the different seasons of life. How would you capture, or what would you advise in healthy expectations for people in this stage of life rematching with somebody?
Yeah. Well, well, those expectations uh, are, to your point you made a few minutes ago. You have children, you have families, you have lots of people involved generally in a person's life. And so those expectations are generally going to be a bit more complex than they would be when a person's 20 or 25 years old. And so it's it's me allowing the other person to have their complexity and them allowing me to have my complexity. Um, yeah, it's a dumb illustration, but it's like when I pulled up Lisa's profile, it said, I have a long-haired dachshund, and we're a package deal. Okay, well, I come with three cops. We're a package deal. So we figure out how to dogs and policemen. Okay, well, that's our complexity. And it's it's learning to give grace and space for those important parts of that person's life, and saying, I'm going to love, it's like she did. I'm going to love your cops, and I'm going to tell her I love your dachshund, and we're going to figure out how to move forward with that.
Yeah. It sounds an awful lot like knowing yourself well enough to know, can I give you this flexibility?
Yeah,
Because I may not be into long hair dachshunds, and you may not be into the stress of what it means to have, you know, three very, very, very close loved ones who risk it for the community on a daily basis.
yeah,
There's that flexibility of you're worth it, therefore, or I will hold back is probably, but I will not press forward with judgment and say, oh, I'm out, I don't think I can do that. Now if it's like, I'm just thinking about, like, my wife is deathly allergic to cats, and if for some reason she found herself later in life dating, if somebody had a cat, that'd be a deal breaker, because she can be flexible in that.
yeah,
But other things, there are other people, there are other themes that I think, we think, oh, I'd never do this, or I'd never date somebody like this, where it's like, if it's not a moral or a legal or a um, ethical issue,
yes,
let it, you're saying, kind of let it coast for a minute.
yeah, yeah. And that was one of the things that I don't know that I did everything right in the dating period, but one of the things that I did do was I was open to a wide variety of possibilities. Um, uh, I dated a couple of ladies that were Jewish, and their families welcomed me into their families, and were just fabulous people. Some of my favorite times were with them. Uh, Dated women who were, highly educated like I am, and then went out with a lady who was a truck driver across who was nothing like me. But they were interesting people, and they all had interesting stories. Uh, and it it was good for me to broaden myself out. I'm going to throw a question at you, which is, do you find, because you mentioned a moment ago, rigidity versus flexibility, do you think that that's a problem that we encounter as we age, a tendency toward more rigidity?
I do. I do. And I'm curious if you found the same thing. I think that we, um, as our brain pares down to the things that we utilize over and over and over again, our brains become more efficient, which
Hmm.
is a really nice design.
Yeah.
With that, I think it can lend itself to us becoming not as flexible, a little more rigid, which I don't think serves us well.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree totally with that. And those were my least favorite experiences dating. The more rigid a person was, the less I had in common with them.
Right.
Um, because I live in a gray area. We work in a gray area. We don't work in black and white. And I like complexity. And I find that rules are great, but there's a lot of exceptions in life as well. And I just encountered a lot of real rigid people that I think we're going to be alone for a long time, unless they found somebody that thought just like the way they did.
Well, and yeah, that's an interesting thought because what I hear from people that tend to have a little bit more of a rigid mindset, and I don't think it's everybody, but it is like, oh, the pool is drying up. There's not as many great people to choose from. And I keep thinking to myself, I know so many people that are really fantastic people, and maybe they're not your cup of tea, but is tea the liquid that you demand every time? I mean,
Mm.
is it could there be a flexibility to find somebody that is maybe just a skosh different than you originally thought that you needed? And it's as you've talked throughout this time, that's what I'm hearing you say, is that you went out on this quest, this adventure, and it's not necessarily, yes, it was to find a mate, yes, it was to find, but it was more about finding. There's also, it seems to me like it was also an internal quest of learning more about you while you learn more about other people.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I made the decision early on into the divorce adjustment. I was going to embrace any kind of therapy or self-discovery or book or seminar, you name it. If it was put in front of me and there was something I could learn from that, I was just going to flat do it. Because how can you be an ethical clinician and not do that? You can't look at yourself in the mirror. And it was a marvelous learning experience. I'm not at all the same person I was 20 years ago because of having gone through all this.
Sure. But that's one of the things that I love most about you, or one of the many things I love most about you, is this internal drive to constantly learn. You're an eternal learner. And it adds a complexity and a dynamic to who you are that is wonderful and fascinating, and I think exciting because it's an advent. It's like we get to do co-adventures.
Yeah, very much so. Well, you're the same way. You're an explorer, and your eyes light up whenever there's a new idea, and you're like, let's go for it. Yeah,
Yeah, all of our fun discussions. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, is
Yeah,
there anything that you want to leave these listeners with? This book, I mean, look, pick it up. It's Rematch, Love in the Extended Adulthood. And where can people pick this up?
yeah. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble websites, Walmart. So it's at all the big distributors. And uh, yeah, love to hear feedback from folks how they're using it and liking it.
Yeah, I'm going to tell everybody, go pick this book up. There's some fun stories. You do highlight different steps, different thoughts, different, like it's it's like a window into the experience. You know how when you say, I said the other day, I said I would love to be a fly on the wall of that experience. This is a fly on the wall of that experience. And
Yeah.
there's so many great stories in here. It's so well written. Everybody needs to go pick this thing up and understand either what your friends are going through or how to go through this in a really, really healthy manner. So, Don,
Well,
thank you for writing this.
well, thank you, and thanks for letting me do this with you. This has been so much fun.
Thank you.
If you found value in our discussion and wish to uncover more about the fascinating world of mental wellness, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where Dr. Long will continue to delve into empowering therapies and strategies for mental wellness. Your journey to understanding and embracing mental health is just beginning, and we're excited to have you with us every step of the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and remember to celebrate restored freedom as you uncover it.